Well, always a wonderful chant that we get on Epiphany Sunday for the proclamation of the new church year and all of the feasts that move dates each year. We get to hear those sung to us as part of the liturgy this Sunday, so that's awesome. Thank you to Darren for that. And just as a collective welcome, we welcome back one of our summer seminarians, Riley O'Shea, whose dulcet tones we just listened to during the responsorial psalm. So we love the beauty of your voice, and we just love you, Riley, and love that you're back. So thank you for joining us. He still has a couple days left yet of his winter break, his Christmas holiday, before he goes back to Sacred Heart in Detroit. So surprise, surprise, he's joining us today. So that's good for us. So thank you for just being with us and giving God's grace to us just by you being here. We're so grateful for that, Riley. I showed up at the 10 o'clock Mass, and I walk in the door, and he's right there, and I'm like, Riley, I didn't know you were going to be here. So surprise for me as well. Surprise for us all. Look at that. Won't the Lord do it? He'll surprise us sometimes, won't he, with the good things. The good surprises. Yeah, good surprises. The Sunday of Epiphany and the story of the three wise men is part of the we'll say the Christian tradition that we learned from the time that we were kids. We all know the story of the wise men, even as children. It's part of the nativity sets that we set up, in the early month of December as kids. And whether you guys had the families that you were able to put baby Jesus in, or you had to wait to put baby Jesus in, I don't exactly remember what we did, whether we put the baby Jesus in before Christmas or not. At any rate, we always did put the wise men in as well. Our wise men were always part of our nativity scenes, even in the month of December. So it was like they were part of what was going on. And the story, of course, of the wise men in the church's liturgy is all about the way that God comes to make himself seen, not simply by his own people, the Jewish nation, but also to the whole world, right? The Magi are the first receivers amongst the Gentiles of the world, of the news of the Christ child. And there's a great gift given to us in the story of the Magi, particularly, I think, in the way that we learn how to better assess God's entrance into our days, into our weeks, into our years. The Magi, of course, knew that a new king was being born because of the signs that they saw in the sky. They were the stargazers, weren't they? Now, God could have chosen anybody to sort of represent the nations. This is, after all, part of God's plan of providence. So he would, in theory, be free to do whatever it is he was going to do for the best of all of us. But he chose the three wise men, the three kings from the east, who of all people found out that a king was being born because they gazed into the sky. This is such a illuminating detail of the story. Because part of the story of the birth of Jesus, as we know, we hear this in the Christmas story itself, but also afterwards here in the Magi story, that the king comes to the world and just about nobody knows, right? This is sort of a hidden event, even though God is officially inaugurating the change of all of human history. Mary and Joseph know. And we find out on Christmas, on that very night that he's born, that some poor shepherds find out. But presumably there is some passage of time between the actual night of the birth of Jesus and the visit from the wise men, right? Because we know that the wise men have seen a star. They've traveled from the east to Jerusalem, and they're telling the king about a birth that has already happened. And then, of course, there's more intervening time whilst the king gathers his people, meets with them secretly, sends them on their way to Bethlehem. Now they're making their way to Bethlehem. This isn't the first night that Jesus is born. There has been some elapsing, is that the right word? Did I get that? Elapsing of time from here to here. Elapsed time, thank you, yeah. And what's still interesting about the story is that even though time has passed, Jerusalem still doesn't know about it. They find out about it, and we're still kind of now into not just the moment, but after the fact. The reason that this illuminates me, I think at least, and maybe for all of us as part of this story, is that Jerusalem, right, the representation of the Jewish people, they have some very specific opportunities to know the nearness of God. Because God does, in human history, choose a people, the Jewish people, to prepare for the coming of the Messiah, to prepare for the salvation of the whole world. And he gives them special access to his truth that the pagan nations, the Gentile nations that surround, don't have. Right? He sends them his word through the prophets, through the great manifestations and miracles that he gives, even by direct intervention of his own grace. But at this point in the story, God's word, God's special revelation to the Jewish people has since ceased for 400 years. The very last prophet, the prophet Malachi, has long since been dead. And so the people, the Jewish people, are in some ways back in the dark. They don't have the kind of direct access to God that they would like to, or at least the kind of access that he used to send to them. And so you can imagine them feeling a little bit like, where's the man been? How can we know he's speaking to us? And you just kind of get that sense now, right, that even the Jewish people might feel like they're groping in the dark. Now, they do have their scriptures. They do have the prophetic writings. Those are revelations of God. And they had used those writings to try and discern what was God's next move. And if they were paying attention, for those who were paying attention to the Jewish scriptures, they could have known that the Messiah was nigh. There are several specific prophecies about the coming of the Messiah, even the timing of the coming of the Messiah in the book of Daniel, that would include, they just went back to their flocks or went back to their own crowd of people who were the humble nobodies. But here comes the Magi. And how is it that they know that God has done something new? Simply by looking at something that everybody in the world had access to. Everybody could see the sky. Everybody. Of all people, the Jewish people would have known that the God of heaven and earth made those stars and made those celestial bodies, some that stayed in place, some that moved around. They would have known that even the glorious things of the firmament spoke of his plan. Yet they didn't see it in the way that the Magi saw it. And when the Magi come, what they do is they open up to us this truth about how God comes in to intervene in our lives, whether we can see it or not, and then what happens next. Because the story of the Magi is a lot like a testimony. It's a lot like what happens when you and I give a Christian testimony. A Christian testimony works like this. A Christian testimony means that we live and we move and we walk in the world in one way. And then at a certain moment, we encounter Christ. That encounter changes our lives. And after that encounter, we're different. And we go on by a different way. That is the same, variations on a theme, every Christian life ever in history. We go a certain way, we encounter Christ, it changes us, and we're different from there on after. And that's exactly what happened to the Magi. They searched their way, and in their searching, they encountered Christ. And after encountering Christ, their lives changed. And they went after that by a different way than they had came. They lived differently than they lived before. And I think there's something so rich as well in this moment of encounter, because what do we find that they bring to the king? We know that they bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I was just thinking about this. I was just praying about this. I was looking at the stained glass window, and I was like, You want to know why the church sort of comments on this? Why do they bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Gold they bring for a king. Frankincense they bring for the divine, for God. And myrrh they bring for the death of the Messiah. They bring for burial. Myrrh was a burial spice. So they're bringing gifts for the king, for God, and for death. And there's something deep in those gifts that they're giving over to Jesus in that encounter. Because we might think of them in the same way that we might think of God's revelation given to us through the prayers that we have in Mary, the joyful mysteries, the glorious mysteries, and the sorrowful mysteries. The joyful mysteries that behold the King, the glorious mysteries that behold the God, the sorrowful mysteries of the Messiah who is crucified. And what is it even that those mysteries of the Rosary reveal to us? But literally, everything that happens in life. What was presented to Jesus by those three kings was everything presented in human life. The joyful things that come our way, the glorious things that come our way, the sorrowful things that come our way, all of those things are presented to God. In any one of those and in all of those circumstances, God takes those, receives those, and changes us, and then we go back by a different way. Oftentimes in life when we seek this, we want to hear from God, and when we want to hear from God, we're like, God, you need to give me a sign. Right? You say that, we pray that way, we're like, God, just give me a sign. I just want to know when I pray to you that I'm hearing from you. I need you to show me, right? We look out for something different, for something unique, for something truly supernatural. And then we're like, all right, God is speaking to me. And can he do that? Yep. And does he do that? Yep. Does it happen every time? Clearly not. Does that mean God only intervenes sometimes? No. Because the story of the wise men is the story of the truth that God makes himself accessible to everybody who's looking. And God says there are certain things that I give everybody access to. And the things that everybody has access to in human life, even these can become an encounter if you can see it in a way that's capable of receiving me. The Jewish people looked at the same sky every night. They had no idea it was telling them about a king. But the three pagans from the east looked at the sky, and they knew that the God from on high, in whatever mysterious way, was announcing something supernatural, and they responded to that searching. And so we'll write when we maybe ponder this story and we're like, yeah, the three wise men, I just put those little three figurines in my nativity set. We know what that story's like. But it's also a story about the testimony of your Christian life and the testimony of my Christian life and where exactly that testimony happens. Does the testimonies of our lives simply happen in the super huge supernatural things that are obvious to us? Or might they also be happening in the stargazing moments? All of those joyful and glorious and even sorrowful moments of life that God enters into. And when we bring those before the King, before the Lord, before the Messiah who is crucified and raised, that encounter changes us to truly walk by a different way thereafter. And that's incredible. A great way for us to pray, a great way for us to grow in our relationship with God isn't simply to always say, God, just give me a sign. Because God might be saying, well, didn't you just notice all of this? Like everything? Did that speak to you? Because it can, if we have the eyes and the heart to see it.